an athlete. You don't have to have even run a marathon to be an athlete. To me, if you're like in the process of, you have a goal in mind and you're taking some action to pursue that, you have the mindset of an athlete. It doesn't matter if you're.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fit Vegan podcast. Today, we have a special guest. We got Matt Frazier, the founder of No Meat Athlete, the co-author of the PlantBased Athlete, which is one of the book we're going to be talking about. It's absolutely amazing wealth of resources. So I'm really excited to have him on. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Lucky. Excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I kind of want to jump. Now we have more time together because we just did an Instagram live the other day. I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into your story, right? So how did you come to veganism in the first place? Kind of what led you to want to take that path?
Sure. So I was on this mission, like 5 years or 6 years into a mission to qualify for the Boston Marathon. This was in 2008, probably. And got pretty close. I had taken 90 minutes off my first marathon time, still had 10 minutes to go or so to actually qualify for Boston. So it had been this huge quest of mine. I was at the very end of it, but I also kind of felt like I didn't know where I was going to find 10 more minutes to take off my marathon time, because I'd already kind of done all the obvious stuff. And so coincidentally, at the same time, I got this urge, just totally like ethical, personal urge to become vegetarian, not vegan or anything yet. I didn't even know what that was. But I had gotten a dog, and I just had kind of started to make this connection about, how come I can love a dog like this? And I really just love this dog, but eat other animals that are, in many ways just as smart, just as feeling. And it just kind of didn't add up to me. So I just said, well, I'm going to try to stop that, at least eat fewer of these animals that to me seem kind of, like dogs, meaning cows, pigs, things like that. And, I was clearly making a judgment and saying, well, then I'll just keep eating fish. But I didn't know. I was just looking for that next step. And so I actually said, I'm going to keep eating fish and chicken and turkey, but no more four-legged animals. And I was worried about protein. I was worried about, I didn't think you could be a vegetarian marathoner. I just didn't, the stories weren't out there then. This was so early. And there were people who were doing it. Like Scott Jurek at that time was just crushing it as an ultra runner, completely vegan, but his story wasn't out there. The internet wasn't as developed. There weren't podcasts, the stories weren't there. And so I, started gradually moving in that direction. And then over the course of a year, I started to go further and loved how I felt and no problems with my training. And finally I said, I can actually go all the way vegetarian, and I'm ready to do it. And so when I did that, I looked around on the internet, couldn't find any information that was helpful. Everything was kind of preachy or just not really, it was not something I would trust. It seemed like people who had kind of agendas and we're activists, basically not approaching it from any kind of, right. It was a turnoff. And for me, that had always been, I grew up eating a standard normal diet. We focus sometimes on healthy eating, but I didn't know anyone who was vegetarian. So I just thought that was almost a weird cult. And I was afraid of what it would, what it would mean to do that. And that was the vibe I got when I looked around. And I thought, wow, there really is an opportunity here to kind of just write about this experiment that I'm going to do, being a marathoner, going vegetarian, and do it in this way, because I wasn't coming from this place of wanting to convert the world. It was just a personal thing. And I said, well, I can just kind of be honest about how it's working. And if it isn't working, I'll say it's not working. And that's when I created this site, No Meat Athlete. It was just a WordPress blog that I started in 5 minutes. And I just started documenting what I was doing and how my runs were going and what I was eating and all this. And then the great shock to me was that it worked so well. It was the complete opposite of what I thought. Being a hindrance, it was the opposite. It was an advantage. I had the best training summer of my life, and just 6 months after going vegetarian, took those last 10 minutes off my marathon time, got myself into Boston, and then from there I had with my blog begun to meet people like Brendan Brazier, Robert Cheek, my co-author on the PlantBased Athlete, knew about Scott Jurek now, and Rich Roll popped up. So people were there. And I was like, wow, these guys are being vegan because of what it does for them. They're doing it for many of them for performance reasons. And I wanted to get into ultra running. So, Scott Jurek kind of became my idol. And I was like, well, I'm going to do what he does. And I got into running 50 milers and did 100 miler as well as I went fully vegan. So I was completely vegan by the time I did my last 50 miler and 100 miler. And that was all back in 2014 when all that when I did my 100. And then since then, it's been much more about kind of entrepreneurship for me, starting a couple different businesses in this plant-based space, watching our No Meat Athlete community really grow and blossom and become something much, much bigger than me and my personal blog. So that's kind of where it is. Wrote a couple of books along the way, did some speaking, all that stuff. And then kind of, bit of a resurgence, I guess, with this new plant-based athlete book. And here we are today talking to you.
Yeah. Well, it's been a beautiful journey because I've heard of No Meat Athlete. I've been vegan for 8 years. A long time ago, I started hearing about, and to see how far you've come and the movement has come as a whole has been awesome. Just going back to kind of like your beginning story, because there's always seems to be that moment for people, and right now it's like, I watch the Game Changers, I watch Forks Over Knife. So what was kind of that thing that triggered? Was it just the one day you were looking at your dog and it was just like, I would eat him,
So those first steps were the gradual ones. There wasn't the light bulb moment. But so that's when I spent like the year of not eating four-legged animals. But then when I really decided to do it, and like 3 days later started the website, was I went to a Tony Robbins event, the motivation speaker kind of guy. Yeah, I went to his Unleash the Power Within in 2009. This was a long time ago. And it was my first one. And on the fourth day of it, I think he still does this. The fourth day was like about health and energy. And he basically encouraged everyone to eat a plant-based diet. He still said he had some fish at that point. But it was all about like energy. He was more like, it wasn't from an ethical thing. It wasn't about a short-term performance. It was kind of just like, this is long-term healthy. And like, this is going to give you the energy to make all these changes and things and have, the motivation, keep your mindset good, all that stuff. And for whatever reason, it like really just stuck with me in a way that hadn't before, probably because it wasn't the ethical message that I, in college and grad school, I had seen the people passing out flyers, and I had read them and like been moved by them, but not enough to actually make the change. But for some reason now, this like little link to that it might not just be good for animals, but like now it was like, wow, like this might be the only healthy decision I could make for the long term. So I dreaded. That's when I decided to do it, and I was like, I'm just gonna do a 10-day challenge of it, of eating fish a couple times a week and otherwise all vegetables. And I don't know. I just loved it. And then when I got to the end of those 10 days, having started the website now, it was like, well, that was awesome. I'm going to go 30 days and not have any fish and like really do it. And then from there, it just led to it. So yeah, that was definitely the light bulb moment. I don't talk about it that much because Tony Robbins kind of tends to turn people off in different ways.
I love Tony, man. Tony's the best.
Go ahead. Yeah. I mean, he's done so much for me, like his motivations, his personal views about different things, they're iffy in some ways, but as far as like just when I need to get myself up a little bit, it's been very, very helpful for me.
Yeah, no, I love Tony. His first book, Awakening a Giant Within, is what got me into self-development and led me on this path of where I'm at now. And that's interesting because I've always wanted to attend one of his events. So if is still a thing on the last day, then that's awesome.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think he goes through phases. Like, where a while he was doing more of a, I don't know, he was eating certain types of like beef and things, but I think now he might be actually back to vegan. I don't know. He's undergone a lot of different health problems and things because of his touring schedule and all that.
Yeah, I think he got cancer. That's what Jen was sharing with me at the time.
I didn't know that.
So he was being pretty quiet about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So Jen was very in touch with that world, and she was like, yeah, so that's why he's switching a lot of things over to plant-based, was for that reason.
Wow.
Yeah. So no, I love Tony. I want to do one of his events. I will once this whole world opens up. If I have to go to Florida to do it, I'll go to Florida.
Right. Yeah. Good. And it's a lot of fun. It definitely is a big boost for a while.
Yeah. And so so one thing is you got into running and in endurance sports and then went vegan. Did you have like an athletic background before you jumped into that? Or was that just like, I want to start running?
Yeah, I really didn't. I mean, I, like a kid, every other kid, played soccer, baseball, golf in high school. So my sports got increasingly less active as I got older. It just became, it ended up with golf. But yeah, I don't know. Somehow in college, when I get into running, it was almost a response to like kind of ignoring health my whole life. Like, I don't know, like I did sports like a kid, but there was never this conversation about like doing sports for your health long term. And so in college, I started lifting weights and stuff like that with friends. And then we just got all into it. Like, we're putting on muscle, and we were like, wow, if we could do a marathon, we would lose a bunch of fat. So we're like, all right, let's do a marathon. And like college kids, we just jumped into it. But it turned out to be awesome. I mean, it was like, I don't know, I thought I was going to qualify for Boston in that first marathon, and wrote that down on my application that 3 hours and 10 minutes was my projected finish time, and ended up running 4:53. So we missed it by 103 minutes. But honestly, like that was the beginning of this path that led me here. Like failing by that much. I mean, I guess the decision to do a marathon and writing down that kind of ambitious time is what it was. But like once I failed, it would have been easy. And my friends, the two I did it with, they haven't run another marathon since. They sort of said, well, we completely failed at that goal and got across the finish line, but it wasn't nothing that they're really that proud of. But for whatever reason, for me, like failing by that much, it put it in my head. I was like, wow, like what, like if I had run a marathon that was 4 minutes faster than this awful, painful thing I just finished, like what kind of shape would I have to be in? And then more than that, like mentally and emotionally, like what kind of place would I have to be in to be someone who, starts out at this speed and can eventually do this thing. And that just like really got exciting. And that's actually when I turned to the Tony Robbins stuff and found it and started writing down, countless times in books and in journals and things that I was going to by this date have a Boston Marathon finisher certificate. And it was never right. It was always way, way too early. But eventually, you write those things down enough times and eventually they kind of become inevitable.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the process of becoming who you needed to become to stand in that position of like, I can qualify for Boston.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And that's like, I realize now, I didn't realize this then, but that's the whole reason to have these goals and go after things. And that's why you can set some crazy, ambitious, enormous goal and actually fail at getting it, but eventually come to realize that you gained 99% of what there was to gain in just kind of becoming who you needed to in the process of going after it, even if you never actually get that end result. And it's very hard to untangle our happiness and satisfaction and fulfillment from the actual achievement of the goal, and just realize you're using the goal as the means that's going to, get you the things that actually matter. Very, very hard. And I still don't do a good job of it. I still focus too much on the goal, but I guess just sort of knowing that that's how it really works is really helpful.
Yeah, it's a strong base of knowledge when it comes to transformation to know, because like if you're vegan, you're vegan. So when you go out, you make those decisions. You are the person that is vegan. So it's easier to make those right decisions, right? You're not going to go out and eat chicken because you're vegan. And also like the endurance sports has a way of just like checking you when I'm going to do this. I'm going to run an Ironman or a marathon in that amount of time. And then it just demands so much respect. It's like, nah, you're not ready for this yet.
Yeah, it absolutely does. But what's cool about endurance sports is that like so much of them, I've heard that the longer the event, the more it's about the training and the less about the genetics. And the nature of endurance sports is like, to me, what was exciting about a marathon was that forever that had seemed possible. I didn't know anyone who had run a marathon. It seemed like a thing that I remember when first time I did a 5-mile run, it was on a course where there were also marathoners running. It was like a very festival kind of thing. And I remember thinking, I don't know how they could possibly do that, because I was running 5 miles. There was also a half marathon. And I remember seeing those finishers and thinking, how can they do that? And then how could anyone go double that and do a full one? And then once I, tackled that and became a marathoner, I had the same experience with 100 milers. Someone told me they had run 100. And again, I wasn't really a runner. I just sort of had fallen into this. And I was like, how can people, like, that must be a typo. You can't actually run 100 miles. It was just crazy. But so like, it literally in my head seemed like an impossible thing. And so what's so cool about endurance sports to me is that without any natural gift for it, if you're just willing to put in the work, you can go almost any distance you want. Like anything that people are doing, almost, I don't want to say everyone, but almost everyone can get themselves to do that if you're willing to work for it. And you can't say that a lot. It's not true of Major League Baseball or NFL, right? Like not everyone can become that if they work hard enough, because you just might not have the genetics for it. Although people prove that wrong too sometimes, but I don't know. It's just, I think it's a really neat thing about the sport. They really, like for me, running has taught me, give me a very, very real experience of doing something that I previously believed to be impossible. And that, that teaches you so many things, in addition to teaching you how to be good at not quitting things and all that. So I really do think endurance sports, as tough as they are, and I don't do them now because I have so much trouble with actually the boredom and the tedium of just being out there putting in those miles. But they have taught me so much and been so valuable for that reason.
Yeah, I completely agree. The beautiful thing is like, if you don't have the genetics to be a sprinter, but you have the ability to train and build mental resilience to just pound those miles and those hours, you're going to be able to complete that race. And then that's the cool part, right? Because if you don't have fast twitch muscle fiber, it doesn't matter how much you train for a sprinter. There's some people that are genetically going to overtake you.
Right. Exactly.
And that's what one part I find interesting about your story is like, you shaved all that time off your marathon and you're like, how can I lose those last 10 minutes? Right. Because at the end of the day, if you really think about athletic performance, everyone's pretty much training at the same intensity, same amount of time. The biggest difference comes down to nutrition and recovery, because you can grab 10 different athletes, pretty much all training the same capacity and volume, maybe a few different tweaks. But what's going to make the difference between them is their ability to recover, and how they're eating. If they're eating McDonald's or eating a plant-based diet, one's going to outperform the other. So I'm curious as to what got you to think that way, because that's not people's first thought. It's under their first thought process, right? They won't go to that first.
Yeah, right. And so I definitely wasn't, and it was almost a coincidence that it worked so well. Like I was focused. I read Chris Carmichael's book, Lance Armstrong's old nutrition guy or trainer, and he had recommended the typical endurance diet, and that for me was like, I think that helped me get from like a 4-hour marathon down to 340 or something like that. That approach to like understanding how much percentage of my diet should be carbohydrate versus protein versus fat. And thinking about it in that kind of level of detail, which prior to that, I really hadn't. It had been just like, I'd come to it from general fitness and thought like, eat lots of lean meat and some vegetables and some whole grains. And that was sort of the diet. And then eventually became eat those same things, but make them match this nutrient profile or macronutrient profile. And so like when I went vegetarian, it wasn't really like, I didn't think that was the secret that was going to get me that final 10 minutes off my marathon. Like that wasn't the point. It was just this ethical thing. And I was trying to hope that it didn't destroy the Boston Marathon quest of mine. But I was kind of willing, like I was at this point where like I said, I had a lot of doubts that I was going to be able to take those last 10 minutes off anyhow. So the idea when this Tony Robbins thing came along and it said, hey, like I want to actually do this, it wasn't like I had a lot to lose. It wasn't like I was on path and I was ready to disrupt it. It was like I didn't know what I was going to do next. So to just try something different and say, well, who knows what'll happen? That wasn't all that hard. But what got me to like pursue a fully plant-based vegan diet, that was the success that I had experienced as a vegetarian. I just, it was so neat to see that I could, because I was eating this totally different way. I was going to farmers markets now. Like most of my plate was coming from fresh fruits and vegetables. And it was like, just this amazing, I don't know. It's just like my whole energy was different. My mindset was different. Everything, it just felt like this was exactly the diet for me. And it was working so well. So from there, it was no big jump, having seen myself qualify for Boston and have the best, able to put in the hardest workouts, the most, not get injured like I always had dealt with before. So having seen that, I was like, wow, like, can I get more out of myself by just going all the way and giving up the dairy products? And I wasn't eating that much cheese or anything, but I thought maybe if I can get rid of that stuff, replace it with even more mindful choices about, high antioxidant, high anti-inflammatory foods, maybe I can get more out of it. And I really did. Like I didn't have any injury issues as an ultra runner. The ones I had experienced as a marathoner, they really kind of melted away once I went fully vegan. And injury just wasn't a factor for me, which is a really neat thing. And I don't like to say like the diet is the only reason why. It could have been the ultra marathon running. I was doing many more slow miles and just putting in the hours on my feet, but not so much pushing as hard as I had to qualify for Boston. I don't really know. But certainly the plant-based diet did not hurt that effort. It did great.
Definitely added benefits. I'm curious because when you went vegan, there wasn't as much resources as there are now, right? For example, like the book you guys just wrote. Obviously protein, like there's a lot of people that are going to be listening that are athletes. And we talked about athletes on the Instagram live, which I would love for you to reshare your definition of an athlete, because I had calls with my members after for our group calls. And like, I resonated with that. I am an athlete. So I definitely would love for you to reshare that. But I'm very curious as to when you first transitioned, which is most people's fear of like the whole protein question. And because you didn't have access to the same resources before, what did you do when you transitioned back then? Were you like, I'm just trying to eat the same amount of protein, or like, I'm not even going to worry about it and just focus on eating plants?
I did worry about it. I knew, or at least I believed that was going to be a big issue. And so like my approach in those early days was actually I didn't like do what, I don't know, when people see vegan plant-based diets now, a lot of times I think as you said, they're more informed and they understand that you can switch to this diet. You can kind of overhaul your whole meals and like go just eat totally different types of foods now. Well, you don't have to, but you can. But back then, what going vegetarian meant for me was like remove the meat from the plate and replace it with something else that is, kind of like meat. So it was either the fake meat products that there were, or some kind of tofu thing or tempeh. And I ate more of those things than I do now. And, it's like, I just kind of replaced it in that way. And so because of that, I wasn't so worried, because I just said, well, I'm just doing a replacement here. I might lose a little bit of protein in that substitution, but I'll make sure I take a protein powder each day. And back then, from the beginning, I took whey protein powder. I just didn't know. And that was one of the things that I stopped doing when I went vegan, was started switch that over to like a hemp or a pea protein blend. And then eventually I got to the point where I was so into whole food eating when I was training for my 100-miler that the protein kind of went out of my mind. I guess I just gained so much confidence from watching myself do these 50-milers and things. And I started to realize that the protein thing, at least in my experience, it just didn't really matter. It was like, I can get this protein, and I don't think, because I ran out one time and I just didn't buy more being lazy. And then a month or two later, I still hadn't. And then I was in the midst of 100-miler training and putting in all these miles, and it was fine. So it was like, to me, that was the end of thinking I have to get protein in order to do this kind of sport. So, I was eating lots of beans and nuts and things, so I was getting it from there, but it just wasn't too big of a factor. Another thing that really helped me in those days was, I came across Brendan Brazier's book, Thrive. I don't know if you've read that one. It's kind of like a classic in the, plant-based performance space. And it was really the first, to me, it was like the Bible of vegan sports nutrition. I don't know if it was from 2007 or 8 when it came out. But I still love Brendan's approach in there. It's like, it's really this cool, interesting alternative approach to thinking about food as energy, and that energy doesn't necessarily equate to calories, but rather nutrients. And so if you can get food that is very nutrient dense, but not necessarily calorie dense, then, you might be able to kind of forget about a lot of those old paradigms that said you have to get 65% of your calories from carbohydrate, or you have to get this many calories per pound of body weight in general. Because if you're getting the nutrients from the foods, then it kind of doesn't matter that they don't have as many calories. So that was really interesting. Some of it I still believe in, some of it I don't know if it's right or not, but it's just, I don't know. I just love that book for the way it taught me to think about food in this different way and thinking about energy specifically. So that's kind of how I dealt with that. And I don't know, by the time I was going vegan, it was now 2012, I guess, or 2011. And there were starting to be more resources. Scott Jurek's book came out in 2012. Rich Roll's book came out in 2012. And those, now, especially with Scott Jurek, I was able to see like his exact recipes. And he had a section in Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Body book where like his grocery list was in there in the appendix, and some other stuff from Scott Jurek. So like I was starting to get some glimpses into what a true top elite, legend in his sport was doing. And I was able to kind of follow that path and also use it to be confident. As for the athlete thing, yeah, that's something I've been thinking about that as well. Cause like ever since I've done No Meat Athlete, we've done Veg Fest and things, and we sell shirts at them. And people will come to our booth, and I haven't done one in a while, but they'd come to our booth and they would say, I'm into this. I love this. I'm all about the no meat thing, but I just don't consider myself an athlete. But then I would find out that they're going to the gym 3 times a week, and they're running 3 times a week, and they're doing plenty of activity. They're doing more activity than I was. So I was like, why can't you call yourself an athlete? And only yesterday, really, I was the interview before I did with you, Howard Jacobson and Josh Lajani were on there, and we were talking about this idea of an athlete. And Howard suggested that it's really more of a mindset thing. Like, you don't have to have achieved, like, you don't have to have qualified for Boston to be an athlete. You don't have to have even run a marathon to be an athlete. To me, if you're like in the process of, you have a goal in mind and you're taking some action to pursue that, you have the mindset of an athlete. It doesn't matter if you're, I don't know, you could be 300 pounds. And this, Howard Jacobson brought this up. He said, like, you could be 300 pounds. Josh Lajani brought it up. And you could be, there could be someone who's 150 pounds lighter than you. And you say, well, look how fast they are. Look what they're doing. He said, but if you put a 150 pound suit on that person to make them carry 150 extra pounds of weight, could they get on and off a bus as easily as you do? Like, could they run, whatever it is, a minute per mile slower than they do, which is what you, the larger person, does? Like, probably not. If you put 150 pounds on someone, it's going to be like, they won't be able to do anything. So he said, underneath of that, like, you have every bit of this athlete. It's just your body's not there yet to get the performance that you want. But if you have that ability and, like, you've got this mindset, to me, that's what it means to be an athlete. You don't have to have achieved anything. You just need to have this kind of direction and purposefulness with your activities, rather than like saying, well, I've lost a little bit of weight, or I'm pretty happy with how my diet and food is now. So I'm just kind of in maintenance mode. I'm trying to get to eat the foods I love, but not let myself get fat or, get out of shape. maybe that's not an athlete, because to me, the athlete is more about like the pursuit of something. Like you're pursuing excellence in some physical way. Excellence meaning only not compared to other people, just compared to whatever you have previously done or whatever you believe you're capable of. So I really have come to believe that it fully is a mindset thing. No like external achievement at all dictates whether or not you're an athlete. It's just if you have that mindset of you're working at something.
Yeah. I 100% agree, because my members brought up that they absolutely love your definition. And then like, that's the whole thing I'm also doing with like Fit Vegan. Like Fit Vegan isn't necessarily like big biceps, flat stomach, and six pack. Is like if you have the mindset of improving yourself from a physical health and mental perspective, you're a fit vegan, and obviously eating vegan diet. But if you have that desire and you're on that path of improvement in these three realms, you are a fit vegan. If you're training, right, and you have that pursuit of that goal, that desire to improve, you are an athlete. People think of like LeBron James, for example, like Chris Paul, because he's vegan. We'll go grab him. Right. This is the word professional athlete, right? You can just have the athlete part, right? You don't need, there doesn't need to be the word professional before to consider yourself an athlete.
Yes. That's such a great distinction. People think that that's what athlete means is professional or elite. But I mean, there are 1,000 regular recreational weekend warrior, not even weekend warrior, people who just, are after some goal, 1,000 times many more athletes than professionals and elite. So that's a really great point.
Yeah, it's just an extra word in front. So I want to dive into the book, right? I'm very because we just gave away 5 books.
Yes,
I'm going to be giving away a few more. They're being shipped today. I'm giving away 5 more next week. What was kind of the inspiration for the book? Because it's a combination of all the information that every athlete should have. Because before, there wasn't like one spot where you could necessarily grab all of that in a concise manner. It was like, okay, let's just grab a little bit from all these different spots. So what got you guys to be like, hey, let's put this together and just like give it out to the world?
A lot of it is that Robert and I have been at this for so long. He much longer than I have. He went vegan in 1995, and I don't know when he started his vegan bodybuilding site, but I think probably like 2000 or mid 2000s or early on. So like we've both been at it for a while, so giving us both time to build audiences that trusted us, write, in my case, 2 books, in his case, 4 books, and like basically get our approach out there and then say, well, what do we do now? Like we've said what to do, how we believe, like what our story was. And so have the people who I mentioned, Rich Roll, Scott Jurek, Brendan Brazier, Fiona Oakes had written a book as well. And several others had written their approach to a plant-based diet or to a vegan diet for sports. But it was very much, all of them, all these accounts were just that person's inspirational story of how it had worked for them and, how they did it, which is fine. And that's great. And that served a place. And that's a necessary step in this sort of thing, is to have people who are pioneers and willing to go out and try it and come back and say, hey, it worked. You should try it too. But our movement, as we've said, has grown up so much in these past 10 years and even more in the past 15 or 20 before that, but especially in the past 10, the past 5, it's just blown up. And so the Game Changers had come out, reaching this mainstream thing, vegan food now being available in fast food restaurants, grocery stores. Like you don't have to make almost any sacrifice anymore as far as taste or food experience goes to be vegan. You would have to go a little bit, further to get it or plan a little more ahead. But like, it's suddenly mainstream accessible for people who have never envisioned themselves wanting to do this. But now if you just get an inkling of an urge, like it's there for you to just go try. So it feels like to me, and also at the same time, we've seen people like Chris Paul, like Venus Williams, like Colin Kaepernick, who else? Cam Newton,
Lewis
Tom Brady.
Hamilton.
Yeah, Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah.
Tons of them, and I'm missing a bunch, but there are soccer players, there are people who I don't even know, European athletes, just tons of people at very, very top levels, Olympic medalists, Novak Djokovic. Top elite peak of the sports world who are eating plant-based diets, and they say that it helps their performance. So like this movement was, Robert and I realized, was ready for something more than here's how I made this thing work and here's my inspirational story. And so we said like we need to write not another plant-based athlete book, but the plant-based athlete book, the one that, looks at way more than just the authors. And really the book's not at all about Robert's and my approaches. It's just, we quickly tell our stories in there, but it's about the 60 athletes who we interviewed in the process of the book, the 30 of whose stories, are really told in detail in the book. And these are people who are Olympic medalists and they're champions, like, I mean, world champion, endurance athletes, not just endurance athletes though, but also power lifters, strong men, strong women, these sports that like for a while, like when I was getting started, it was the endurance world kind of was starting to understand as Scott Jurek, was lighting it up, Rich Roll. People had the sense that, hey, there might be something to this, but suddenly now in the past few years, it's getting hot among powerlifters, which is like, who would have thought the vegan diet works for powerlifting? It just doesn't seem like it belongs there. So we wanted to tell that story and all these stories that all these different athletes are making this work, and find out what are the common factors that work for all of them, distill it down into some principles now, which I hope are much more, can give someone much more confidence than just the idea that this thing worked for one person, because there's always this idea that, well, like maybe it worked for that person's body, but I'm different and it's just not going to work for me. So really that's what it was. Robert had the idea in 2018, came to me and said like, hey, I have an idea for a book. I want to write the book. And he asked me to be his partner on it. And I said, yeah. And it's really turned out to be a great partnership, just because I said, we've both been at it for so long, on that kind of Veg Fest circuit, especially him, speaking, just kind of hustling, working hard, and like been in those early days, very, very hard to support ourselves with this, but we both found ways to do it. And I think there just was a lot of appreciation for that in anyone that we approached, because in the 12 years I've been at it and the 25 he's been at it, we've just made so many friends in the space, people who a lot of people look up to and respect. Not nearly as many of, I mean, it's blowing up now on Instagram and YouTube. And there are lots of people who like you, who like, I'm only just getting to know now. But like a lot of people who had been at this for a very long time all stepped up and like wanted to be a part of this and helped it. And I think that's because of the trust we built over the years of working at it. And because all these people recognized that this was different. This was not just another one of the 10 or 12 books that have the author telling their story, but rather it's something that's stepping back and saying the movement is ready for something that is a more scientific look. And we do cite some research in there, more than other books have for sure. There's still not all that much, but it's in the works. So yeah, just, I don't know. It felt like it was time. It felt like it was a growing up for this movement for Robert and I as authors. And that's how it came about.
Yeah. And that's amazing, because I see it, because I know I've read Rich Roll's and Brendan Fraser, everyone's books, and it's very, again, like about their story, but this is like full on loaded with resources that you can just go back to, highlight, be like, hey, let me implement this. And I like that you guys covered a wide spectrum of sports, because when I first went vegan, the only people you'd hear of is endurance athlete. I was like, well, I don't want to be an endurance athlete right now. I don't feel like being skinny, right? I need to build muscle. So it's nice. Like a lot of people stepped up. You have some powerlifters, you have some bodybuilders. You look at like Tori, David Carter, Nimai, Dom Thompson, like all these big guys that like have good muscle mass. And you're like, oh, that's appealing, right? It's starting to appeal to more people because there's more muscular guys like following the vegan diet.
Definitely. And women too. We included a lot of women in this book, because that's I think a group whose stories just haven't been told as much for whatever reason. I don't know why. But there are some really, really great, I mean, some of the top, I think the Olympic medalists in the book, if I'm not mistaken, were all female. So it's happening everywhere. And yeah, like you said, it's the endurance thing was cool. Like that was our foot in the door basically for this diet, and people to start to say, hey, like maybe that'll also work for this other sport. So it had to go through endurance. I think the sport that happens to, favor people who don't have a lot of body weight, who don't have a lot of extra fat, who are very light, like that helps with endurance. So that's not the way that we spread it to a mainstream audience, but that is something that will get athletes to start to consider, because we see champion athletes in some sort of sport using this diet because they say it helps them. So then it goes to the next sport from there. And it's interesting the way it sort of like funnels through sports. Like first was endurance. Then it seemed like around the Forks Over Knives time, 2011, 2012, the MMA scene was like all about it all of a sudden. And I think because endurance is a big part of that, and recovery is a huge part of that. So it's sort of natural that it would, someone would find an advantage, find an edge with the diet, and then tell a couple of people about it. And then suddenly it just goes through the sport. So that seemed to happen. And then, like I said, now it seems like it's hitting the strength world, the powerlifters specifically. And thankfully that's more than endurance for sure. That's the one that I think is helping people, making it visibly attractive and interesting to a more mainstream audience.
Yeah, it's definitely getting more backing from that world. Like when Arnold's also started speaking about eating more plant-based, like that really helped a lot. Two macronutrients that I want to dive into. One of them, obviously protein. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of talking about protein all the time. It's just like, just eat it. Don't worry about it. But you guys mentioned in the book, one of the studies, 1.2 to 2 grams per kg of body weight. And like we talked previously, like that's, Robert eats under that, because I remember when I was chatting with him, he was under like the 1 gram per kg of body weight, I think.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
how much, when you guys spoke to all the athletes, what was the kind of consensus on, like, do they obsess over protein, or are they just like, I just eat and I don't worry about it?
For the most part, it's in between that. There are examples on either side. Nick Squires, powerlifter, great example of a guy who focuses on getting a lot of protein still and does, and he gets it through things like Beyond Meat, which some of the other athletes, they won't touch because they think it's not a whole food, and they're specifically only going with what their body wants as long as it's whole food and vegan. Dotsie Bausch being a great example, Olympic medalist, cyclist, who basically just eats according to kind of what feels good at the time. Of course, favoring whole plant foods. But then everyone else is kind of in between. There's this idea, people know about it. They're aware of their protein count. I mean, how could most people not be? Just with, it's been hammered into our heads for so long, especially as athletes. But they don't obsess over it. I would say most athletes that I talk to, not just in the book, but in the 12 years of doing this, I'd say most people come out in like the 12 to 15% of calories from protein, of all their calories range, which I don't know, it depends on body weight, obviously. I would guess that puts most people at around like maybe the 1.2, the lower end of that range that you cited.
Like a 60 to 100 grams a day for most people, like calorie wise.
Yeah, I'd say in there. And kilograms, it's 2.2 kilograms in a pound. So 1.2 kilograms is something I think like 0.55 or 0.5 per pound. So a 150 pounder, 75 grams of protein is around where you'd be. And I'd say most people are between that and 100. Is their typical protein intake. Some people will supplement with it. Some people just tend to like focus on foods that they know of as protein sources. It's funny, like, everyone knows nowadays that like broccoli has so much protein per calorie.
Kale, mushroom.
I mean, in all those things, it doesn't mean those things like become your protein source, any one of them, because most of them are not calorically dense enough to be a source of any major macronutrient. But when all of your foods, if you're eating whole foods, when all of them have some baseline of 10% of their calories from protein, and many have much more than that. It's almost like I don't know. I've kind of stopped thinking about certain foods as protein foods and others as not. It's still in my mind for sure. Like I still try to get beans in my dinner and lunch every day.
When it's hard not to think about it.
Yeah, exactly. But as I learn more about it and learn more about like, I'm big into the blue zones diets, these pockets around the world of people who lived a long time. I guess like I eat beans now, and people say, well, you eat those for the protein. I'm like, I guess that's why I started eating beans, but I eat beans more because they're like a longevity food, and they're just loaded with micronutrients and fiber and lots of like there's a lot of reasons I eat beans that have nothing to do with protein. And that's kind of how I think most of the plant-based diet is. Like there are so many different amazing, wonderful things. It's a shame that like people have to go to protein and say, yeah, but like, does it have enough protein? Because I don't go to, I guess I do. I don't look at an omnivorous diet and say, yeah, but does it have, all these micronutrients? But like, there's lots and lots of factors that we should be optimizing for, not just one macronutrient that marketers have told us that we should focus on. So anyway, yeah, I think in general, that attitude is more and more pervasive now among athletes who understand and know this. But there's still that thing. And a lot of these athletes have a lot on the line. Like it's hard for athletes to make a drastic change. And even if they believe that they don't need more than some very low amount, like 10% of calories from protein, like Robert gets, it's hard for them to, bet on that being true. Yeah. And I don't blame them. I understand why you wouldn't. You don't want to risk, a 3-month reversal of results and suddenly a big setback.
Their livelihood, their income depends on that. And
exactly. And that's why I think it's still slow to kind of proliferate in the very highest levels of mainstream sport. Thankfully, it's happening, but it's going to be last because there's a lot riding on that. There's wealth for generations in their family that potentially could cut off if they make a mistake with their diet. So a lot of people just aren't going to risk that, But it's starting to happen, and the stories are out there. So anyway, yeah, I'd say as far as protein goes, I'd say most people are mindful of it, but they're becoming less and less obsessed.
Yeah, I think it's a great indicator that top professional athletes in all these different fields that you guys interviewed, from endurance to strength to power, that make their money and that make like their livelihood from competing and being a top performer are making the switch. And like you said, like slowly more people are, because there's always that little bit of a fear, but now more and more people are doing it. And at one point it's just going to be like, hey, like if the top people are doing it, if my competitor in a basketball game that I can't like stop Chris Paul, then maybe I should look into it.
Yeah. It keeps like, there's this a bit of a sense of like what else do we need to prove or do with a plant-based diet? Like any sport you want, you can find someone who is one of the very best in the world who eats this way. And that's like, I mean, incredible feats. There are world records being set. Like all the people who use a plant-based diet and claim that's why they can do this stuff. And it's like, what more do we need to do? Like, is it that we need a lot more science? Do we need the reports to come out that demonstrate without a doubt that this is at least a viable alternative to these other more popular diets? And I think the answer is no. I think the science will help some pro athletes try it, but I think really what it's going to take is it's like academia versus industry. Something may prove great in the lab or prove great in theory, but until people are actually using that information to make money, basically, or in a situation that's visible and their livelihoods depend on, no one's really gonna believe it. So I think that's kind of what the next step is for more and more pro athletes to do it. Books like ours, for sure, are helping to convince people, even at that level, to give it a try. But I think that's what it's going to take. I think, and we are going to hit this point where we see a large number of people, larger than you would expect from the percentage of the population who's vegan. When we see larger numbers than that in the sports world, I think we'll start to hit a tipping point. And I don't think we'll ever get to a point when everyone does it. This is the only diet any top athletes do. Because I think there are a lot of just obstacles and things that are standing in the way of that happening. But if we can get to a point where I don't know, a third or a quarter of athletes are eating plant-based diets, that's going to be really, really strong evidence that there's something to this.
Yeah, definitely. And the other macronutrient I want to talk about is carbohydrates, right? Because if the people that are going to be listening, if there is professional athletes, that's really cool that they're listening to the podcast. But right, for athletes that are listening, many people have a massive fear of carbohydrates. Or like, I understand, like I want to transition to plant-based, or I am plant-based, but I'm still really scared to load up on carbohydrates. I know all the athletes majority of the athletes in the book are high carb. I know you are. What have you found to be kind of a recurring theme amongst all the athletes? And what would you say when you get that question all the time?
Yeah, I mean, the huge factor, which is obvious to many of us, but to some people it's not, is that not all carbohydrates are the same, right? Whole food carbohydrates are complex carbohydrates. They are not the same as refined flour or just pure sugar that is taken away from the fruit that it came from, or from cane or whatever else. They're completely different things. And these carbohydrates that are complex and are in whole food form, they generally come with a tremendous amount of good stuff with them. And they bring the fiber. They tend to be the foods that bring all the micronutrients. And they don't bring the baggage by and large. Like if you look at animal protein, like if you're trying to get your protein and you're using animal products, it comes with saturated fat, and it comes with lots of other things, hormonally active issues. I mean, IGF-1 production, all kinds of things you don't want going on in your body that come with it. Whereas these carbohydrates tend to be packaged, with a lot of really good stuff. So I don't think this is the answer people want to hear, because I know people want to think about protein, carbs, and fat, especially if you're into making changes to your body specific, trying to lose fat, trying to gain muscle. But like from a broader, just sort of athlete perspective, my sense is that people don't think that much anymore. At least top athletes who are serious about this, they don't think all that much about the difference between protein and carbs and fat. They think about, are they eating a whole plant food? Like I said with the beans, like that's a whole plant food that is completely supportive of health and energy and all these things. And it comes with carbohydrate, it comes with protein. It doesn't come with too much fat, except for certain ones. And I guess like that is the way that I think a lot of these athletes do think about the food. They obviously are following, some guidelines, and they're keeping their carbohydrates in certain ranges. The 65 to 70% is a very common range among athletes of total calories. But I don't know. I think like when you start thinking less about which macronutrients are in your food, and more about what is this food doing for me as far as energy, as far as protection from disease, as far as anti-inflammatory, these are all things that are really like a different paradigm than which macronutrient is this food composed of. And I honestly think that's the more important one. I think if you're getting enough calories, then that mix, doesn't affect all that much your performance one way or the other. The mix of macronutrients. I think so. It's so much more about, are you providing your body with the micronutrients, like we're talking about with Brendan Frazier and Thrive. And when you go with whole plant foods, that is just an abundance of those nutrients. And especially if you mix it up and eat a large variety, so I think like what's so cool about a plant-based diet for me is like, whether I'm seriously involved in training for something or whether I'm in a period where I'm really not, if I just eat a mix of plant foods, and like I'll still use oil and things like that here and there when I'm cooking, again, like the Blue Zone stuff. So I'm not terrified of oil, but you don't want to use too much because it's different from the other foods. It's not a whole food. It's not a package that comes with all the macronutrients and lots of micronutrients. It's more just one thing. So like that's one thing you don't want to overdo it with. But if you eat this abundance of foods, you eat a variety of foods, and they're all providing you all of the all the macronutrients in some amount, varying amounts, but all you're going to end up, almost no matter what you do, you're going to end up with something that's where you're eating between 60 and 70, maybe 75% of your calories from carbohydrates. You're going to end up with somewhere between 10 and 15 from protein, and the rest is going to be from fat. And for most athletic pursuits, that turns out to be fine. And that's my point. Like, I'm not saying that's the optimal mix. I'm saying that's fine. And what's optimal about it is how much nutrition it's providing you in the form of the micronutrients.
Yeah. So many people focus too much on the calorie aspect and not enough on the nutrient load that they can get with that amount of calorie. And it's funny, as you're sharing that, I just like noticed that a lot of people tend to isolate a lot of their micronutrients. So they'll go for oil, which is just pure fat, right? Or they'll go for processed flour, which is going to be pretty much pure carbs. Or they're going to go for like egg white chicken, which is pretty much pure protein because there's not any other macronutrient in it. But when you're focusing on eating whole food plant-based, it's a different mindset because you have to accept that whatever food you eat, there's going to be a combination of at least two micronutrients, like tofu, protein and fat, tempeh, carbs and protein, beans, carbs and protein. There's always going to be a mixture of two different macronutrients compared to if you're eating more processed and animal-based foods.
Yeah. And that's a great point. And I think what I hope people can get out of this is like, so you said they have to accept it, but like, I hope people can get to a point where it's not have to accept it. It's more like they're eating these foods because of that. Like if you can call a food a fat, a protein, or a carbohydrate, to me, then that's probably not a food you should be eating very much of. And that's why I mentioned oil as an exception, a food that I don't think I should be eating very much of, but I'm not afraid of it because I see the evidence. And I believe that a little bit, if you're not a heart disease patient or extremely overweight, I think it may actually be beneficial in reasonable amounts. But I don't have any food that I can call a protein, and even protein powder. I'm kind of like, certain people definitely need it when you're transitioning to this diet. If you're over 60, if you're a special, specific type of athlete, like a lot of this audience that we're talking to, who's trying to hit certain macro, numbers, very useful for those people. But for a lot of people, like I just like in my day to day, I don't typically eat protein powder because it's something that I could call a protein. And like, I'd rather just get protein in one of those packages that comes with all the other things.
You can definitely hit and have enough protein through whole foods. I put so much green in my smoothie that it tastes terrible. So a scoop of protein powder just flavors the whole thing. And I'm like, I'm good to go. Obviously I really want people to go and buy the book. So what I'll do is I'll put a link down below for people to go and listen to it on Audible, because that's what I've been doing. But just for people that are listening, I've asked you this question on the live as well, but who is this book for and who is it not for?
Yeah. So yesterday you asked me who it's not for, and I had trouble thinking up with someone who it's not for. And I wish I could, because I hate saying this is for everyone. Because to me, I feel like I know that's the thing. Like I've always felt like and said that if you're making something that's for everyone, you're kind of making it for no one, because if it's that diluted that it's for everyone, then how can it really be exactly the book any one person needs to read? But so I guess you've got to be interested in the plant-based diet, or else you're not going to want to get through it. You're not going to find inspiration in the stories. You've got to at least accept that a plant-based diet. So if you're a lifelong hardcore paleo keto fan and you're just in that camp and you are not going to budge from it, then,
or carnivore,
then I guess you don't need to read this book, and because it's not going to do anything for you because you're not going to do it. So that's who it's not for. But as far as like, it is for all different types of athletes. Like I said, there are pro athletes who will read this book and who will be inspired from it and learn from it. Because a lot of pro athletes don't honestly know that much about nutrition, right? They focus so much on their training. They may have a nutritionist who's helped them. But a lot of them won't have their eyes open to this yet. And like, it's funny, you come across people like, I'm by no means a pro athlete or an elite athlete. I'm the athlete without the adjective in front of it, or the recreational athlete, if you want. But like, it's funny, I find people who've been reading No Meat Athlete for like in this book, like Sonia Looney, just world-class endurance mountain biker, world champion, does like 24-hour and multi-day mountain bike stuff. And she's like been a No Meat Athlete fan forever. And I'm always like, it's just amazing to me that these top athletes are finding value in what's essentially pretty basic information about how to eat a plant-based diet. Because I'm not writing any of my content for pros. It's for the every man, every woman who like wants to do this and doesn't have all day to dedicate to their nutrition. So I'm always amazed when top athletes are intrigued by it and find value in it, but they do. So it's for serious athletes. It is definitely like, there is potential that a serious athlete will read this book and find something that will help them get to another level because they've never explored nutrition or been willing to try this form of nutrition. But obviously, much like we said, there's 1,000 times more athletes out there and people who don't call themselves athletes yet, but I think should, who it's really for. It's for the person who, values fitness, understands the role of fitness. Maybe he already does lots of sports, maybe doesn't at all yet and wants to, and is looking for the inspiration. And to me, that's what like sort of the undersold part of this book is like, people ask us in these interviews a lot about the athletes and their stories and their approaches. And we talk about nutrition and all that stuff. But what you don't get until you actually read it is the experience of 30 times in the book, you read someone's like really fascinating, interesting story. We talked about my Boston Marathon thing at the beginning, which is not one of the stories in the book that goes in any depth, but like, I hope people hear that and they're like, wow, like that's really interesting that someone could have something that they thought was impossible and then decide they want to do it. Like, hopefully that resonates with me. And if it doesn't resonate with you, if mine doesn't, the hope is that one of these stories in the book will, and these athlete stories are much, much more dramatic and better than mine. They're people who have, like I said, achieved the very highest levels of their sport. And some of them weren't even athletes, weren't into any competitive sports like Dotsie Bausch until mid-20s or something. So, even if you're not an athlete, even if you don't call yourself that yet, and even if your mindset isn't there yet, but you're looking for something to light that fire, then you're going to find something here because there's so much just neat inspiration from these athletes. And then once you get inspired by an athlete, you flip to the back and you see exactly what they eat from morning until night, because there's this day in the life section. And several of those athletes, many of them, contributed most of the 60 recipes that are in the back. So you get the single most important or single few most important meals that a specific athlete said, they'd want to share here. So to me, like, if you're at all curious about that, then the book is for you, because it's just cool for me to see as an athlete myself. And like, I go through lulls where I'm not motivated at all, but I've learned through the years that like sometimes when I'm not at all motivated to do anything outside, like just do sports, I'm just like feeling lazy. If I just can't get myself to go take action, a lot of times I can get there by instead focusing a lot on diet. And like, I'll read a diet book and I'll start cleaning up my diet and I'll start drinking vegetable juice or something, or I've been doing this thing called the warrior diet recently, which has been fun. It's like 1 meal a day kind of thing. You start with juice. Not that I think that's the healthy thing, but like, it's just one of those kind of detours that I took. Exploring. Yeah, exactly. So you try something new and then suddenly you feel lean and light and energetic. It's like, hey, maybe I will go for a run today. And then that's the beginning of, going down a path of fitness. And for me, that's recently been kettlebells. But I think there's a lot of power in that, in like finding an idea that inspires you, even if it's not the thing that you think is what you need to improve. But it turns out that thing is your roundabout way of changing the thing that you really do need to improve. So I think all that's in this book. And I think a lot of people will find that kind of value, even if what you think you're getting out of the book is just nutrition tips. Yeah. And I want to add to that, because I get a ton of messages every day. A lot of what I answer, you can just buy the book and it's all going to be in there. If you're vegan and want to go vegan, everything's in there. Every question that you may have that I answer 100 times a day is all in that book. And it's not for people who don't want to be healthy, who don't want more energy, who don't want to thrive. If you don't want any of those things, then don't buy the book. All right. Only if you want to thrive and you want energy, get the book. Yeah, which is a great point. Like, that is everyone we're talking to, because that's why they're listening to this. But it's a really good point that like a lot of people don't want that. A lot of people they're not interested in improving that, or they don't think they can. And so like in my mind, I'm like, well, who actually doesn't want to thrive and doesn't want, but there are a lot of people who aren't interested in that. So if you're listening to this, then you are one of the relatively few who do. So it's for you.
We got a hardcore fit vegan family here. They all want to thrive.
Of course.
So yeah, Matt, I want to say thank you very much for taking the time to jump on the podcast, sharing your story, opening up and talk about the book. I am stoked for people to read it. And I'll link everything down below for Matt. So you guys want to check out No Meat Athlete, the link to get the book, the Audible, absolutely everything will be down below so you guys can check it out. And Matt, thank you very much for jumping on the podcast. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I absolutely love what you are doing, and would love to have you on sometime to our podcast and share your story with our audience.
Awesome. We'll make that happen. Thank you.
All right, great.